3 weeks ago, I thought I understood what loss meant. Standing here in Cedar Falls Cemetery, watching them lower Michael's casket into the Ohio soil, I'm learning that grief has layers I never imagined existed. The entire town showed up. Michael wasn't just my husband. He was Coach Williams, the man who transformed our high school football team from small-town dreamers into state champions. Mrs. Henderson from the library brought homemade apple pie. The Kowalski family drove 3 hours from Cleveland. Even teenagers who'd graduated years ago stood respectfully in their Sunday best. But something felt off from the moment I woke up this morning. Maybe it started when I couldn't find Michael's favorite tie, the navy one with tiny footballs that I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. Daniel, Michael's brother, had insisted on handling all the funeral arrangements, claiming I was too distraught to think clearly. He'd chosen everything, the flowers, the music, even what Michael would wear. When I asked about the tie, Daniel just shrugged and said the funeral home had taken care of everything. Or maybe it was the clothes casket. Daniel had been adamant about it, despite my protests. "Emma, you don't want to remember him that way," he'd said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. The heart attack, it wasn't kind to his appearance. Standing at the graveside now, I watched Daniel's fingers constantly dancing across his phone screen. Sarah, Daniel's wife, hadn't looked me in the eye once today. Every time I tried to approach her, she'd suddenly find someone else to talk to, someone else who needed her immediate attention. But the strangest behavior came from Jessica, my own sister. The woman who held my hand through every crisis since childhood was now fidgeting like a teenager caught in a lie. During Pastor Henry's beautiful eulogy about Michael's dedication to family and community, Jessica kept glancing toward the parking lot as if she was planning an escape route. Grief affects everyone differently, I kept telling myself. We were all processing the shock. Michael's heart attack had come without warning. One minute he was mowing our front lawn on a perfect Saturday morning. The next minute, paramedics were telling me there was nothing they could do. The reception at Cedar Falls Community Center felt like moving through thick fog. Neighbors offered condolences, shared memories, pressed casserole dishes into my hands. The Hendersons told me about the time Michael had driven their son to the hospital during a thunderstorm. The Martinez family reminisced about Michael organizing the annual scholarship fund. Everyone had a story about how Coach Williams had changed their lives, except the people who should have been grieving alongside me. I needed air, space, a moment away from the sympathetic smiles and gentle touches. The community center bathroom became my sanctuary, a place to splash cold water on my face and try to make sense of the hollow feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with missing Michael. That's when I saw it. Tucked behind the mirror, barely visible unless you were looking at exactly the right angle, was a small piece of paper folded into a tight square. My name was written on the outside in handwriting that made my knees buckle. Michael's handwriting. The same careful cursive that had filled 15 years of anniversary cards, grocery lists, and love notes tucked into my lunch bag. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the paper and read words that turned my entire world upside down. "Emma, I never died. They're all in on it. Trust no one at this memorial, especially not Daniel and Jessica. Check the basement of our old house on Maple Street. Come alone. Your loving husband, M." The bathroom wall seemed to close in around me. I'd identified Michael's body myself. I'd watched them seal his casket. I'd just witnessed his burial. But that handwriting, I'd know it anywhere. And suddenly, Daniel's phone obsession, Sarah's avoidance, Jessica's nervous energy, it all took on a sinister new meaning. The question wasn't whether Michael was really dead. The question was, what were they all hiding from me? Before I take you through what happened to me, I need to know, Drop a comment and tell me where in this beautiful world you're watching from right now. Because I have a feeling some of you know exactly what it's like when the people who are supposed to love you most make you question your own worth. If that reality hits close to home, hit that like button so I know you're here with me. And if you want more stories like this, the kind that cut deep but help us heal, make sure you subscribe. This is where we come together, where we share the truths that matter. This is your safe space, and I want you right here with me for every story. My hands were still shaking as I clutched the note, Michael's impossible words burning into my retinas. The community center buzzed with funeral small talk just outside the bathroom door, but I felt completely isolated from reality. I had to know. I had to understand how a dead man's handwriting had appeared at his own memorial. Racing to my car, I dialed Patterson Funeral Home with fingers that barely cooperated. Mr. Patterson had buried half of Cedar Falls over the past 30 years. If anyone would have answers, it would be him. Patterson Funeral Home, this is Harold speaking. Mr. Patterson, this is Emma Williams. I need to ask you something about my husband's arrangements. His voice immediately softened. Of course, Mrs. Williams. How can I help? I took a shaken breath. Did anyone else have access to Michael's body before the service? Anyone at all? The pause that followed lasted an eternity. In that silence, I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Well, he finally said, his voice careful and measured. There was one unusual request. Your brother-in-law Daniel called the night before the service. He was quite insistent about having a private viewing. My stomach dropped. Private viewing? He said he needed closure, that he couldn't bear to see Michael during the public viewing with everyone around. He was very emotional about it, Mrs. Williams. Said he needed to say goodbye to his brother alone. Daniel, the same Daniel who'd insisted on handling every funeral detail, who demanded a closed casket, who'd been glued to his phone during the entire memorial. We normally don't allow private viewings after preparation is complete, but given his grief and considering he's family, I made an exception. He was there for an hour. An hour? 60 minutes alone with what I'd believed was my husband's body. Mr. Patterson, my voice came out as barely a whisper. When you prepared Michael, was there anything unusual? Anything that seemed off? Another pause. This one felt dangerous. Mrs. Williams, I think perhaps you should speak with someone. Grief can make us question. I hung up. My mind raced through the timeline. Daniel's urgent insistence on closed casket, his mysterious hour alone with the body, his constant phone checking during the funeral, Sarah's inability to look at me, Jessica's nervous energy, and now this note, written in handwriting I'd recognize in my sleep. The old house on Maple Street, our first rental when we'd moved to Cedar Falls 15 years ago. It had been empty for years, scheduled for demolition. Why would Michael want me to go there? What could possibly be hidden in that abandoned place? I started the engine, my hand steadying now that I had a destination. As I pulled out of the community center parking lot, I caught sight of Daniel in my rearview mirror. He was standing by his car, pressing his phone to his ear, watching me drive away. The expression on his face wasn't grief. It was fear, and I was about to find out why. The old house on Maple Street looked like a skeleton against the gray October sky. Paint peeled from its siding in long strips, and the front porch sagged under the weight of neglect. Michael and I had been so young when we'd rented this place, 23 and full of dreams about building a life in Cedar Falls. Now, standing before its broken windows and overgrown yard, I felt like I was staring at a tomb. The front door was boarded up, but I remembered the loose basement window on the east side. Michael had always meant to fix it, but we'd moved out before he got around to it. My fingers found the familiar latch, and the window swung open with a rusty protest. Dropping into the musty darkness below, I clicked on my phone's flashlight. The basement looked exactly as we'd left it years ago. Concrete walls, exposed beams, that old workbench Michael had used for his weekend projects. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something recent. Someone had been here. The workbench that had once held Michael's tools now displayed something that made my blood freeze. Photographs, dozens of them, scattered across the wooden surface like playing cards dealt by a madman. All of them were pictures of me. Me leaving the Cedar Falls Library after work. Me grocery shopping at Henderson's Market. Me pumping gas on Tuesday morning. Me walking into our house with mail in my hand. Every mundane moment of my life captured from a distance by someone hiding in shadows. I picked up one photo with trembling fingers. It showed me sitting on our front porch last week, still in my black funeral dress, reading sympathy cards. The angle suggested the photographer had been crouched behind the Kowalski's hedge. On the back, written in Daniel's sharp handwriting, October 15, 3:47 p.m., subject appears vulnerable. Subject! They were calling me a subject! My hands moved frantically through the pile, photo after photo, each one dated and timed with clinical precision. Some went back months, long before Michael's supposed heart attack. In one, I was watering our garden in July. Another showed me leaving my book club in August. But the most chilling ones were recent. Me crying in my car after selecting Michael's burial suit. Me signing papers at the funeral home. Me standing alone at Michael's graveside yesterday morning when I thought no one was watching. How long had they been watching me? How long had I been living my life completely unaware that my every move was being documented like evidence in a case file? Beneath the photographs, I found a manila folder that made my heart stop completely. The tab was labeled in Jessica's neat teacher handwriting, insurance policies, confidential. Inside were documents that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my marriage. A life insurance policy on Michael worth $2 million dated just 6 months ago. But my name wasn't anywhere on the beneficiary line. Daniel Williams, primary beneficiary, 40%. Jessica Porter, secondary beneficiary, 40%. Cedar Falls Youth Athletics Fund, 20%. $2 million, split between my husband's brother and my own sister with a charitable donation thrown in to make it look legitimate. I'd never seen this policy before. Michael handled our finances, but we'd always discussed major decisions together. A $2 million life insurance policy wasn't something you just forgot to mention to your spouse. Unless you were planning something that your spouse could never know about. My knees buckled as the implications crashed over me. The stalker photos, the secret insurance policy, Daniel's private viewing, the closed casket that I'd never been allowed to question. What if Michael really was alive? What if this had all been an elaborate setup to fake his death, collect the insurance money, and... Footsteps. Heavy footsteps moving across the floor directly over my head. Then voices, multiple voices filtering down through the floorboards with terrifying clarity. "She's here," someone said. A man's voice, familiar but distorted by the wooden barrier between us. "I told you she'd figure it out," came another voice, higher pitched, female, nervous. And then a third voice that made my soul leave my body. Emma was always too smart for her own good. Michael's voice, my dead husband's voice, coming from the living room of our old house. I pressed myself against the basement wall, phone clutched to my chest as the footsteps moved toward what I knew was the basement door. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were coming for me. I pressed myself against the cold basement wall, barely breathing, as the voices above became clearer. My phone's flashlight was off now, leaving me in complete darkness, except for thin slivers of light bleeding through the floorboard gaps. "She found the basement, just like we predicted she would," Michael's voice drifted down. That familiar tone I had heard whisper good morning to me for 15 years, now discussing me like I was a chess piece they'd successfully moved into position. "This is spiraling out of control," Jessica hissed. My own sister, the woman who'd braided my hair before school dances, sounded terrified. Maybe we should have stuck with the original plan. Original plan? My heart hammered against my ribs as I strained to hear more. "No," Daniel's voice cut through sharply. "She saw the note. She knows too much now. We finish this tonight or we all go down together." Note. The note I'd found behind the bathroom mirror. They'd planted it there, knowing exactly how I would react, knowing I'd come here like a moth to flame. Michael's laugh was cold, nothing like the warm chuckle I remembered from Sunday mornings over coffee. You should have seen her face at the funeral, Danny. So broken, so lost. She actually believed I was dead. "She mourned you for 3 weeks. Jessica's voice cracked. "Emma cried herself to sleep every night. I watched her through her bedroom window and she—" "Stop it," Daniel snapped. "Don't go soft on us now. Remember what's at stake here." I bit my knuckle to keep from gasping aloud. Jessica had been watching me grieve through my bedroom window. My own sister had been part of this surveillance operation, documenting my pain like it was research data. "The gambling debts won't disappear because you're having second thoughts," Michael continued, his voice moving closer to what I knew was the kitchen area. "Those people in Columbus aren't the forgiving type. They want their money, or they want blood. The insurance payout is our only way out. Gambling debts. All those late nights when Michael claimed he was at school reviewing game film, all those weekend trips he said were coaching conferences, he'd been gambling away our future and accumulating dangerous enemies. $2 million split 3 ways clears your debts and gives all of us fresh starts somewhere else, but only if Emma doesn't walk out of here tonight." The floorboards creaked as someone heavy moved directly overhead. Michael's footsteps, I realized with sickening clarity. The man I'd buried this afternoon was pacing above me, planning my murder. The car accident scenario would have been cleaner. Brake lines failing on that winding road near Miller's Creek. It would have looked tragic, but natural. Emma's too careful a driver. This way is more certain. A grieving widow, distraught over her husband's death, drives to their old house and tragically takes her own life. Very poetic, very believable. They'd been planning this for months. Every detail, every contingency, every way I might react to Michael's fake death. The note in the bathroom wasn't a warning from my husband. It was bait designed to lure me to this exact spot.
She's been down there too long. Daniel's voice carried a new urgency. What if she found the photos? Then she knows exactly how long we've been watching her. She knows there's no escape. The footsteps moved in unison now, 3 sets of feet heading toward the basement door. I could hear the old hinges protesting as the door at the top of the stairs opened. Light spilled down the wooden steps, casting long shadows across the basement floor. The doorknob to the basement began to turn with a slow, deliberate rotation that sounded like a death knell in the suffocating silence. I was trapped 20 feet underground with no escape route, listening to 3 people I trusted with my life discussing the best method for ending it. The first footstep creaked on the basement stairs. The basement stairs groaned under Michael's weight as he descended, followed by Daniel and Jessica. I crouched behind the old furnace, my heart beating so loud I was certain they could hear it echoing off the concrete walls. "Emma!" Michael's voice carried a mockingly sweet tone. "I know you're down here, sweetheart. We saw your car parked outside." A flashlight beam swept across the basement, missing me by inches. I held my breath as the light passed over the scattered photographs on the workbench. "Look at this mess," Daniel muttered. "She's seen everything." "Good," Michael replied, his footsteps moving closer to my hiding spot. "Emma, come out. We need to talk." Jessica's voice trembled from somewhere near the stairs. "Michael, maybe we can still—" "Still what?" Michael's tone turned vicious. "Convince her this was all a misunderstanding? That the $2 million in life insurance and 6 months of surveillance photos were just coincidences?" I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. The man speaking wasn't my husband anymore. This cold, calculating stranger wearing Michael's voice was someone I'd never met. "You always were too curious for your own good. Remember when we first moved to Cedar Falls? You insisted on exploring every corner of this house, finding all its little secrets. Well, congratulations, Emma. You found the biggest secret of all." "She trusted us," Jessica whispered, and I heard genuine anguish in her voice. "Emma trusted all of us completely." "Trust is expensive," Daniel shot back, "and right now we can't afford it. Those people in Columbus don't care about family bonds or guilty consciences. They want their money." Michael laughed bitterly. 18 months of poker games at that warehouse. 18 months of telling myself I could win back what I'd lost. Instead, I dug us into a hole so deep that faking my death became the smart choice. The flashlight beam found my ankle. "There you are." I scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The basement was small and they were blocking the only exit. Michael's face appeared in the dim light, and the sight of him nearly stopped my heart. He looked exactly the same. Same brown hair, same hazel eyes, same scar on his chin from a childhood accident. But those eyes held no warmth, no recognition of 15 years of marriage, no trace of the man who used to bring me coffee in bed every Sunday morning. "Hello, wife," he said, and the words sounded like poison. "How?" was all I managed to whisper. "Brilliant question. Let me paint you a picture." Michael settled onto an old crate, making himself comfortable like he was about to tell a bedtime story. 6 months ago, when the gambling debts hit $200,000, I started getting visits from some very unfriendly people, men who explained in graphic detail what happens to Welchers who can't pay. Daniel joined him, his expression grim.
That's when Michael came to Jessica and me. We needed a solution that would clear his debts and keep us all alive. The life insurance policy was the easy part. Michael took out the policy naming us as beneficiaries to avoid suspicion. A grieving widow collecting insurance money gets scrutinized. Siblings and close family members much less suspicious. But we needed a body, Michael continued. Fortunately, Cedar Falls has excellent connections to the Columbus medical system. Unclaimed corpses, people with no family, no one to ask questions. A little cash in the right hands, and suddenly we had a John Doe who matched my height and weight. I felt sick. The closed casket was necessary because even with dental work and careful preparation, a close examination would have revealed the deception. That's why I insisted on handling all the funeral arrangements. That's why I needed that private viewing to make sure everything looked perfect. "The note in the bathroom," I whispered, understanding washing over me like ice water. Michael smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. "You always loved mysteries, Emma. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist that little puzzle. Classic bait and switch. Make you think you're being warned when you're actually being led exactly where we want you. The photos, the surveillance, bringing you here tonight, every detail planned months in advance. But now you know too much, and those men in Columbus are expecting their money by Friday." Jessica's voice cracked from the darkness. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way." Michael's mask finally slipped completely. "Emma dies tonight or we all die by Friday. Those are our choices." The basement fell silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing. "We finish this tonight, all of us or none of us," Daniel said quietly. Michael nodded and reached into his jacket pocket. "I'm sorry, Emma, but you should have just stayed home and grieved like a normal widow."
The furnace room had a small window I'd forgotten about, one that led to the backyard crawl space. While Michael reached for whatever was in his jacket pocket, I launched myself through that narrow opening with adrenaline-fueled desperation. Glass scraped my arms as I squeezed through, but I barely felt it. Behind me, Michael's shouts echoed from the basement as I scrambled across the overgrown yard and into the alley behind Maple Street. My car was parked out front, impossible to reach without being seen. But Mrs. Chen's house 2 blocks away still had the spare key under her flower pot, a tradition from when I used to house sit during her Florida winters. 20 minutes later, I sat in her dusty living room with her ancient computer, my hands still shaking as I logged into our joint bank account. If Michael had been gambling for 18 months, there had to be traces, digital breadcrumbs that would prove everything I just witnessed. What I found made my stomach lurch. Withdrawals, hundreds of them, dating back 20 months. 500 here, 1,000 there, always in cash, always from ATMs scattered across Columbus. The amounts grew larger over time. By last month, Michael was pulling $3,000 at a time from our savings. Our insurance premiums had tripled 6 months ago. I'd questioned it then, but Michael had explained it as protecting our future. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me now. But it was the bank statements from Daniel's account that revealed the true scope of their deception. I'd gained access through our shared family banking app, something we'd set up years ago for splitting holiday expenses. Daniel hadn't removed my access.
deposits, large ones, always exactly 1 day after Michael's withdrawals. The money was being funneled through Daniel to hide the gambling losses. My brother-in-law hadn't just been helping plan my husband's fake death, he'd been enabling his addiction for almost 2 years. Then I found Jessica's account. My sister, who taught 3rd grade and lived paycheck to paycheck, suddenly had $40,000 deposited 3 months ago. The memo line read, "Consultation, MW Project." MW, Michael Williams. They've been paying Jessica for her participation in this scheme. My own sister had sold me out for enough money to pay off her student loans. I printed everything, my teacher's instincts kicking in as I organized the evidence like lesson plans. Bank records, insurance documents, a timeline of withdrawals and deposits that painted a clear picture of premeditated fraud. That's when I noticed something that stopped me cold. The handwriting analysis I dismissed earlier suddenly became crucial. I pulled out one of the stalker photos from my purse, the one showing me at the grocery store with October 15th, 3:47 p.m. written on the back. Comparing it to a grocery list in Jessica's handwriting that was stuck to Mrs. Chen's refrigerator, the similarities were unmistakable. The way she formed her letter P, the slight leftward slant, the specific way she dotted her I's. Jessica hadn't just been watching me through my bedroom window. She'd been the one documenting my movements, creating the surveillance record they'd need to establish my patterns and vulnerabilities. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We know where you are, Emma. Come home. Let's finish this conversation properly." I looked out Mrs. Chen's front window and felt my blood freeze. Daniel's truck was parked across the street, engine running, headlights off. How long had he been sitting there? How had they found me so quickly? Another text arrived. "The Chen house has excellent sight lines. We can see you in the living room." I dropped to the floor, crawling away from the windows, my mind racing. They weren't just 3 steps ahead of me. They'd been playing this game for months while I remained completely oblivious. A third text made my hands tremble. "You have 10 minutes to come outside or we come in. Your choice, Emma." The hunter had become the hunted, and I was running out of places to hide. I had 5 minutes before they came for me. 5 minutes to figure out how 3 people I trusted with my life had orchestrated the perfect betrayal. That's when I remembered Ray Castellanos. Ray had investigated vandalism at the library last year, kids spray painting the back wall. He'd been kind, patient, and professional. More importantly, he'd recently left the police force to start a private investigation business. If anyone could help me disappear long enough to think clearly, it was Ray. My fingers shook as I dialed his number from Miss Chen's landline. "Castellanos Investigations? Ray, it's Emma Williams from the library. Something terrible is happening. I think my husband faked his death, and now they want to hurt me." A pause. "Emma? I was at Michael's funeral. What are you talking about?" I know how it sounds, but I found evidence, bank records, photos of me being watched. Ray, I'm scared." "Where are you?" "The Chen house, on Birch Street. They're outside watching me." "Lock the doors. I'll be there in 15 minutes. 12 minutes later, Ray's sedan pulled up. Through the window, I watched Daniel's truck start up and slowly drive away. They weren't ready for complications yet. Ray looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing too much human ugliness. But his eyes were kind as he sat across from me at Mrs. Chen's kitchen table. He said simply, "Talk to me." I told him everything, the note,
The basement discovery, the insurance policy, the conversation I'd overheard. Ray listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Emma, I need to tell you something. About 3 months ago, I took a case involving insurance fraud, suspected cheating at underground poker games in Columbus. My stomach dropped. I spent weeks doing surveillance at a warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. Your husband was there regularly, along with some dangerous people. During my investigation, I recorded conversations that, well, they didn't seem important to your case until now. He pulled out a small digital recorder. I debated whether to tell you about Michael's gambling. After he died, it seemed cruel to destroy your memories of him. But given what you've just told me, he pressed play. The audio was muffled, recorded from a distance, but I can make out voices. Michael's voice, strained with desperation. I'm in deep, Danny. Deeper than I ever told Emma. These people don't just break legs. They make examples. Daniel's response. How much, Mike? 200,000. Maybe more with interest. A long silence. Then Jessica's voice. There has to be another way. We can't do this to Emma. Emma can't know, Michael said firmly. If she finds out about the gambling, about how much I've lost of our savings, it'll destroy her. This way, she thinks she's mourning a hero instead of a fool. But the insurance money, Jessica started, will clear my debts and give you both enough to start over. Emma gets to remember me as Coach Williams, not as the man who gambled away their future. The conversation continued, revealing the twisted logic they used to justify their deception. In their minds, they were protecting me from the truth about Michael's addiction while solving their financial crisis. But then came the part that made my blood freeze. Daniel's voice. What if she gets suspicious? Emma's smart. A pause. Then Michael's response, flat and emotionless. Then we make sure she can't tell anyone. Grief makes people do unpredictable things. Accidents happen. The recording ended there. Ray and I sat in heavy silence, even filtered through static and distance. The casual way Michael had discussed my potential elimination was chilling. There's one more recording, Ray said quietly. From last week, Michael was on his phone outside the warehouse. This audio was clearer, apparently recorded from closer range. Michael's voice. The deadline is Friday. If this isn't resolved by then, those Columbus people will come for all of us. I won't let that happen. A pause as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Do whatever it takes. I've already lost everything else. I won't lose my life, too. The call ended, and I could hear Michael's footsteps walking away. Ray turned off the recorder and looked at me with genuine sympathy. Emma, I'm sorry. I know this isn't the man you married. I stared at my hands, trying to process the recordings. This wasn't some criminal mastermind. This was a desperate, frightened man who'd made increasingly terrible choices to avoid facing the consequences of his addiction. But that didn't make him any less dangerous. What do we do now? I whispered. Ray's expression was grim. Now we figure out how to keep you alive until Friday.
Ray drove me straight to the Cedar Falls Police Department. The building looked different at night, less welcoming, more fortress-like under the harsh parking lot lights. Detective Sarah Martinez was working late, which Ray said was typical for her. She's good people, he assured me as we walked through the glass doors. Thorough, fair, and she doesn't dismiss victims. Detective Martinez was younger than I had expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp brown eyes and an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. Ray had called ahead, so she was waiting for us in interview room B with a cup of coffee and a legal pad.
Mrs. Williams, I understand you have information about your husband's death that we need to review. I spread everything across the table like evidence at a trial. Bank statements showing Michael's gambling withdrawals, the surveillance photos with dates and times, the life insurance policy naming Daniel and Jessica as beneficiaries, Ray's recordings from the warehouse. Detective Martinez examined each piece methodically, asking pointed questions about timelines and corroborating details. When Ray played the audio recordings, she listened with the focused intensity of someone who'd heard plenty of confessions. These recordings were obtained legally during a legitimate insurance fraud investigation, Ray confirmed. I have the paperwork to prove it. After reviewing everything, Martinez excused herself to make phone calls. Through the interview room window, I watched her speaking animatedly with other officers, pointing at documents, clearly building momentum. 20 minutes later, she returned with District Attorney Patricia Hoffman, a woman whose reputation for prosecuting complex fraud cases was legendary in our county. Mrs. Williams, this is one of the most elaborate insurance fraud schemes I've ever seen. The surveillance component elevates it to stalking charges. The fake death adds identity fraud, and the threats against your life make this attempted murder. She flipped through the evidence with practiced efficiency. We have enough here for warrants, multiple warrants. How long will that take? I asked. Judge Peterson is still in his chambers tonight working on a backlog. Given the imminent threat to your safety, I can have warrants signed within 2 hours. Detective Martinez leaned forward. We'll coordinate arrests simultaneously. Michael at whatever location he's using, Daniel at his home, Jessica at hers. No warning, no chance for them to run or destroy evidence. Relief flooded through me for the first time in hours. Finally, adults were taking control. Finally, someone with actual authority was going to stop this nightmare. Where will you stay tonight? Martinez asked. Somewhere they can't find you. My cousin lives in Millfield, about 40 minutes away. They don't know about her. Ray nodded approvingly. Perfect. We'll get you there safely, and by morning this will all be over. As we gathered the evidence to leave, my phone rang. The caller ID made my heart skip. Daniel. I looked at Detective Martinez, who nodded and gestured for me to answer while she readied a recording device. Hello, Daniel. Emma. His voice sounded strained and desperate. We need to talk, all of us, tonight. I don't think that's a good idea. Emma, please, there are things you don't understand, things about Michael's situation that make this more complicated than you realize. I could hear Martinez writing notes, her pen moving rapidly across paper. What things? Not over the phone. Meet us at Miller's Park by the old pavilion, 1 hour. Daniel, Emma, if you don't come, people are going to get hurt. Not just us, other people, innocent people. The line went dead. Martinez looked up from her notes with a grim expression. Mrs. Williams, I think they just handed us the perfect opportunity to end this. At 11:47 p.m., Cedar Falls became a crime scene. I watched from Detective Martinez's unmarked car as 3 simultaneous raids unfolded across our small town. The police had wired me for the Miller Park meeting, but it became unnecessary when all 3 suspects were located at their homes, apparently believing they still had time to plan my elimination. The first arrest happened at Daniel and Sarah's house on Elm Street. Through Martinez's radio, I heard the controlled chaos.
Suspect in custody. No resistance. Wife and children secured safely. Sarah's sobs carried across the police frequency. She'd known nothing. 20 years of marriage, and Daniel had kept his participation in this scheme completely hidden from her. I thought about their twin daughters asleep upstairs while their father was led away in handcuffs, and my heart broke for them. Jessica's arrest was quieter, but somehow more devastating. She lived alone in a small apartment near the elementary school where she taught. When officers knocked, she simply opened the door and held out her wrist. "I've been waiting for you," she said, according to the officer's report. Through the radio static, I could hear her crying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." My sister. The woman who'd helped me pick out my wedding dress, who'd held my hand during our mother's funeral, who'd been my maid of honor and closest confidant for 34 years. She'd been watching me through my bedroom window while I grieved for a man who wasn't even dead. But it was Michael's arrest that shattered something fundamental in my understanding of reality. He was staying at a motel outside Columbus, apparently waiting for word that I'd been handled. When officers burst through the door of room 237, they found him packing a suitcase with cash, fake identification documents, and a one-way bus ticket to Phoenix. Detective Martinez received the call confirming his arrest while we sat in her car outside the police station. The voice on the radio was professional, but I could hear the underlying amazement. "Suspect Michael Williams is alive and in custody. Repeat, the deceased is alive and in custody." "Emma, are you okay?" I wasn't okay. I was watching my entire life reshape itself around a lie so massive that our entire community had been deceived. The coach who mentored hundreds of teenagers, the husband who made me coffee every Sunday morning, the man whose eulogy brought grown men to tears, that person had never existed. "How many people knew?" I whispered. "Based on the evidence, just the 3 of them. Everyone else, the funeral director, the medical examiner, even Sarah, they were all deceived just like you were." By dawn, news crews had descended on Cedar Falls. The story was too incredible to ignore. Beloved high school coach fakes his own death, plots to murder his wife for insurance money. The town was reeling. Parents questioned whether they'd ever really known the man who'd coached their children. Former players struggled to reconcile their memories with reality. But the most shocking development came at 2 p.m. when D.A. Hoffman called with news that made my knees buckle. "Emma, we need to exhume the body we buried as Michael Williams. We need to identify who's actually in that grave." Somewhere in Cedar Falls Cemetery lay a stranger whose death had been stolen to facilitate my husband's fake demise. And I was going to have to watch them dig him up. 8 weeks later, I sat in the front row of Judge Harrison's courtroom, still wearing black. Not for mourning anymore, but because it felt like armor against the 3 faces I couldn't bear to see clearly. The exhumation had revealed the heartbreaking truth. Thomas Rodriguez, a 62-year-old man who died alone at Columbus General Hospital. No family, no visitors during his final days. The funeral director later testified that Michael had paid $3,000 to have Thomas's body prepared appropriately for our deception. I kept thinking about Thomas during D.A. Hoffman's opening statement. Someone's grandfather reduced to a prop in my husband's desperate scheme. This isn't just insurance fraud, D.A. Hoffman told the jury. This is about a man who looked at his wife of 15 years and decided her life was worth less than his gambling debts. Michael sat 20 feet away, thinner now, wearing an ill-fitting public defender suit. Sometimes I caught myself looking for traces of the man who used to leave me notes in my lunch bag. But that person felt like a character from a book I'd read long ago. Jessica's lawyer spoke next, and hearing her described as a devoted teacher who made one terrible mistake almost broke me. One mistake, as if months of watching me cry myself to sleep was a momentary lapse in judgment. When I took the witness stand, the courtroom felt suffocatingly small. "Mrs. Williams," D.A. Hoffman said gently, "can you tell us about the morning you found the note?" I looked out at the packed gallery. Half a town had come to watch their former football coach's wife testify against him. Mrs. Henderson sat in the third row, the same woman who'd brought apple pie to Michael's fake funeral. "I thought my husband was trying to protect me," I said, my voice barely audible. Even after he was supposedly dead, I believed he was still looking out for me. The surveillance photos appeared on the courtroom screens. Images of me watering our garden, walking to my car, sitting alone on our porch, reading sympathy cards. The jury's faces showed a mixture of horror and pity when they realized how thoroughly my privacy had been violated. "That's me, 3 days after the funeral," I said, pointing to one photo. I was reading a card from one of Michael's former students. The boy had written about how Coach Williams taught him to never give up. My voice broke on those words. The irony was unbearable. Michael inspiring teenagers to persevere while simultaneously planning to abandon everything we built together. The most devastating moment came when they played Ray's warehouse recordings. Michael's voice filled the courtroom, discussing my elimination with the casual tone he'd once used to plan weekend barbecues. "That's my husband talking about killing me," I whispered to the jury. Several of them visibly flinched. Michael's public defender immediately objected. "Your Honor, these recordings are prejudicial and—" "They're evidence," Judge Harrison interrupted. "The jury will hear them." But when the defense moved to exclude the recordings entirely, claiming they were obtained improperly, the judge called an unexpected recess. The legal technicality could potentially derail the entire case. As the courtroom emptied, Michael finally looked directly at me. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been remorse in his eyes. Or maybe it was just fear about spending the next 20 years in prison. "Emma," he mouthed silently across the room. I turned away. Whatever he wanted to say, I wasn't ready to hear it. The man that I loved was gone. The question now was whether the man who had replaced him would pay for what he had done. Judge Harrison returned from his chambers with a grim expression that told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. "The recordings will be admitted into evidence. The jury may hear them in their entirety." Michael's public defender slumped in his chair. Jessica covered her face with her hands. Daniel stared straight ahead with the hollow expression of a man watching his life end in real time. D.A. Hoffman wasted no time. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to hear the defendant's own voices describing their conspiracy to defraud insurance companies and eliminate Emma Williams." The first recording crackled through the courtroom speakers. Michael's voice captured 3 months before his fake death. $200 grand, Danny. They want it by Christmas or they start breaking things that don't heal.
I watched the jurors' faces as they heard my husband's desperation escalate into something darker. The woman in seat 4, Mrs. Patterson, whose son played on Michael's team, kept shaking her head as if she could deny what her ears were telling her. Emma can't know about the gambling, Michael's voice continued. She still thinks I'm the same guy she married. If she finds out how much I've stolen from our savings. Stolen. Even in his private moments, Michael knew exactly what he'd done to our marriage. The second recording was worse. Jessica's voice, trembling but complicit. I can watch her routines, document when she's most vulnerable, but Michael, this is my sister. She's also the only person standing between us and $2 million, Michael replied coldly. Emma's always been too trusting. That's gonna make this easier. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't block out Daniel's voice joining the conspiracy. The funeral home connection will work. Cash payment, no questions asked. We stage the death, collect the insurance, and everyone disappears. When the recording reached Michael's final statement, Emma dies this week, one way or another. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen above the keys. Dr. Patricia Vance, the county medical examiner, took the stand next. Her testimony was clinical but devastating. The body buried as Michael Williams showed signs of advanced liver disease and malnutrition consistent with chronic alcoholism. Mr. Williams had no history of alcohol abuse. Additionally, dental records confirmed the deceased was Thomas Rodriguez, age 62, who died of natural causes at Columbus General Hospital. In your professional opinion, D.A. Hoffman asked, was this death staged? Without question. The defendants used an unclaimed corpse to simulate Mr. Williams' death while he remained alive and planned his wife's murder. Michael's lawyer tried desperately to salvage something during cross-examination. Dr. Vance, isn't it possible my client genuinely feared for his life and made this desperate choice to protect his family? The evidence suggests Mr. Williams was primarily concerned with collecting insurance money and eliminating witnesses to his fraud. That's not protection. That's premeditated murder. As the medical testimony concluded, I felt a strange emptiness settling over me. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation I'd imagined. It was just bureaucratic procedure, slowly dismantling the lie that had consumed my life. Judge Harrison dismissed the jury for deliberation at 4:30 p.m. As they filed out, I caught sight of Michael one last time. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe, just exhaustion. I walked to my car through a crowd of reporters and curious townspeople, my head down, avoiding eye contact. The parking lot was nearly empty when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The jury doesn't know everything, Emma. There are others involved, others who won't let this end with convictions. Watch yourself. My hands started trembling as I read it again. The message came from a Columbus area code, the same city where Michael had accumulated his gambling debts. Another text arrived immediately. Some debts don't disappear just because the debtor goes to prison. You've made powerful enemies, Mrs. Williams. I looked around the empty parking lot, suddenly aware that Michael's criminal associates were still out there, still owed money that would never be paid. The trial might be ending, but my nightmare was just beginning. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and 43 minutes. I spent that time in the courthouse cafeteria, pushing stale vending machine sandwiches around a paper plate while Ray sat across from me, occasionally making small talk that neither of us believed in. When the bailiff called us back to the courtroom at 10:47 a.m., I could barely feel my legs walking down the aisle. The jurors filed in without making eye contact with the defendants, a sign that usually meant conviction, according to Ray. As the jury reached a verdict, Judge Harrison asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man who'd coached Little League with Michael years ago, stood slowly. "We have, Your Honor." On the charge of insurance fraud in the first degree against Michael Williams, how do you find? Guilty. The word hit me like a physical blow. Even though I'd expected it, hearing it spoken aloud made everything final in a way that months of evidence and testimony hadn't. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Michael Williams, how do you find? Guilty. Michael's head dropped to the defense table. Across the courtroom, his mother began crying softly, the same woman who taught me to make his favorite chocolate chip cookies during our first Christmas as newlyweds. The verdicts continued in the same devastating pattern. Jessica, guilty on all counts. Daniel, guilty on all counts. Each pronouncement felt like watching dominoes fall, each one representing another relationship destroyed, another piece of my life that could never be rebuilt. When it came time for sentencing 3 weeks later, Judge Harrison's words were measured but harsh. Michael Williams, you orchestrated an elaborate scheme that betrayed every person who trusted you. You planned to murder your wife for 15 years to cover your crimes. This court sentences you to 25 years in state prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. 25 years. Michael would be 68 when he got out if he lived that long. I tried to feel satisfied, but mostly I just felt hollow. Jessica received 12 years with possibility of parole in 7. As they led her away in shackles, she looked at me one last time and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I wanted to feel anger, but all I could manage was a deep, bone-tired sadness for the sister I lost long before I knew she was gone. Daniel got 18 years. His wife Sarah had filed divorce the day after his conviction, taking their daughters to live with her parents in Michigan, another family destroyed by Michael's choices. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, but I had nothing to say to them. Ray drove me home in silence past the shuttered remains of our old life. The house looked smaller somehow, less significant than it had when I'd shared it with someone I believed loved me. That night, I sat in our bedroom, my bedroom now, sorting through 15 years of marriage that apparently had been built on lies. Wedding photos where Michael's smile now looked calculated. Anniversary cards where his handwritten promises felt like mockery. The life I thought I'd been living had never existed at all. 3 months later, I was finally starting to sleep through the night when the letter arrived. It was postmarked from Marion Correctional Institution, addressed in Michael's careful handwriting. My first instinct was to burn it unopened, but something made me slice through the envelope. Emma, I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to, but there are things you need to know. Things I never told the police, because I was protecting you from people far more dangerous than me. The gambling debts were just the beginning. There are others involved, others who won't forget what happened in that warehouse. Be careful. Some promises can't be broken just because the person who made them is in prison. M. My hands were shaking as I read it again. The trial was over,
but Michael's secrets weren't.
2 years after the trial, I finally understood what people meant when they talked about starting over. The insurance company settled out of court $2 million that felt more like blood money than compensation. I donated half of it to establish the Thomas Rodriguez Memorial Foundation, named after the homeless veteran whose death had been stolen from Michael's scheme. We provide funeral services for people who die alone, ensuring no one else becomes an unnamed prop in someone else's deception. The foundation office sits in downtown Cedar Falls, 3 blocks from the courthouse where my old life ended. Every morning, I walk past the coffee shop where Michael and I used to grab breakfast before his games, past the park where we talked about having children someday, past the cemetery where Thomas Rodriguez now rests under a proper headstone with his real name. My garden has become something of a local attraction, though not for reasons I'd planned. What started as therapy, digging in dirt, planting things that would grow and bloom, evolved into a memorial space where people leave flowers for their own losses. The irony isn't lost on me. The woman who buried a stranger thinking he was her husband now tends a garden where strangers come to grieve. Cedar Falls treats me like a curiosity. Half the town sees me as the victim who survived an elaborate conspiracy. The other half whispers that I must have known something, that wives always know when their husbands are lying. At Henderson's Market, conversations stop when I enter aisles. Some people offer sympathetic smiles, others can't meet my eyes. Mrs. Patterson, whose son played football for Michael, stopped me outside the library last month. "Emma, honey, I need to ask you something that's been bothering me for 2 years." I braced myself for another question about whether I'd suspected Michael's gambling, whether I'd noticed anything strange, whether I felt guilty for not preventing his crimes. Instead, she said, "Do you think he ever really loved you?" The question hit harder than any accusation, because after 24 months of therapy, legal proceedings, and sleepless nights, I still didn't know the answer. I told her, "I think he loved the version of himself that existed when he was with me, but I don't think he loved me enough to choose me over his addiction." That conversation stayed with me for weeks, circling through my mind as I worked in the garden or sat in foundation meetings. Love, I've learned, isn't just about the good moments you share with someone. It's about what they're willing to sacrifice to protect those moments. Michael had been willing to sacrifice everything except his own survival. Last week, while cleaning out the closet in what used to be our bedroom, I found a shoebox tucked behind winter coats I hadn't touched since the trial. Inside were mementos from our marriage, ticket stubs from our first date, the hotel key card from our honeymoon, a dried rose from our 5th anniversary dinner. At the bottom of the box was an envelope I'd never seen before, addressed in Michael's handwriting. The postmark was from 6 months ago, but I'd had no memory of receiving it. Had I unconsciously hidden it from myself? Had I been so determined to move forward that I'd blocked out this final communication? The letter sat unopened in my hands for an hour. Outside, I could hear neighborhood children playing in the park where Michael used to coach Little League. Their laughter drifted through the window like an echo from a different lifetime.
Part of me wanted to burn the letter without reading it. Part of me needed to know what final secrets Michael thought he needed to share. But mostly, I felt tired, bone-deep exhausted by the thought of uncovering one more layer of deception. I placed the letter back in the shoebox and returned it to the closet. Some conversations are better left unfinished. Some doors should stay closed. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Michael's story wasn't quite over, and neither, perhaps, was mine.
So I have to ask you the most important question from my story today. When the people closest to you betray your trust in the most unimaginable way, is forgiveness still possible? Or are some betrayals simply unforgivable? Tell me your honest thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to hear more stories about people who refuse to stay victims. We're building a community here of fighters who believe that justice isn't just something that happens to other people, it's something we fight for ourselves. If that sounds like you, I want you here with us. And if you know someone who's struggling with family betrayal or wondering if they'll ever be able to trust again after being deceived by someone they loved, share this story with them. Sometimes hearing that someone else survived the unthinkable is exactly what a person needs to find their own strength. You never know whose life you might change by hitting that share button. I'll see you in the next story. And remember, you're stronger than you know.